Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar that will give you an overview of how to develop and use a checklist during an internal audit. This is completely based on my experience as first, second, and third-party auditor for more than 30 years. My name is Carlos Pereira de Cruz. I've been working with ISO 9001 since 1989 and with ISO 14001 even before 1994. With what was at the time the British standard 7750. I do quite a lot of ISO 9001 and ISO 14001 consulting and training, but also auditing as lead auditor. So today I'm going to share with you my thoughts and experience about this topic. My presentation will last approximately 40 to 45 minutes, after which we'll do a 10-minute question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question, you don't have to wait for the Q&A session. You can ask it during my presentation by writing it in the chat box. Okay, let's go. So this is our agenda for today. So we start with the audit assignment. Then we speak about what auditors do, and collecting criteria or collecting the criteria is the next topic, because the audit criteria are the basis for developing a checklist. Then some techniques that I use to develop the questions in the checklist. Then comes the organizing the checklist. I have used this theater metaphor for many years. When preparing an audit, after preparing the checklist, the auditor metaphorically must prepare a script for the audit, which is the best itinerary, which is the best way to do the audit. Then how to use the checklist and how and why to complement the checklist during the audit. So let's go. So your journey as an internal auditor starts when you receive an audit assignment. You have an audit to do. Remember, you don't do audits because you want or because you like it. No. You audit for a client, a quality manager, an audit manager. They need an audit and they assign that responsibility, that task to you. So when receiving an audit assignment, you receive at least 3 types of information. You are informed about the audit scope, that is the boundaries, the limits of your audit. With this information, you may determine which processes, which departments, which products or services, which functions are going to be included in your audit. You are also informed about the audit objectives, the purpose of the audit. The audit objectives may be about the design of the system within the scope, something like, is the system well designed? Another objective may be, is the system implemented? So, are people following the rules? Another objective may be, is the system effective? Is it delivering a performance level according to what is expected? And the final one may be, are there any opportunities for improvement? So, when your system is very young, the question about design is more relevant. When you are implementing your system, the conformance question is more important. But as the system matures, the question about effectiveness becomes increasingly relevant. So I see the audit objectives as questions. By the end of the audit, when the auditor writes the audit report, he or she will have collected evidence that allows writing an audit conclusion that serves as an answer to the audit objectives questions. Audit objectives are perhaps, I would say, one of the most undervalued topics in internal audits, because internal audits normally copy certification body audits. So you may have a system where rules are followed, or a system where rules are followed, but objectives are not being met. The system is doing right the wrong things. Or in another way, The ship is sinking, the Titanic is sinking, and the musicians continue to play. Okay, or a system where rules are followed and are effective. Okay, and the third topic is you are also informed about the audit criteria, the rules that are in place and that the organization expects are being followed. It can be internal procedures and instructions, can be compliance obligations, can be the management system standards, can be a contract with an important client. Okay, so this is these three topics that are given to you when you are assigned to do an audit. So what auditors do during an audit? So while doing an audit, auditors go into reality within the scope and they collect audit evidence. They compare the audit evidence with audit criteria. And this comparison results in positive and negative audit findings. At the end of the audit, auditors compare all audit findings and any patterns that may emerge with the audit objectives. This comparison results in the audit conclusion. So the checklist will be used by auditors to organize the collection of audit evidence. And auditors use the audit criteria to develop their checklists. Now, so let's go to the about the audit criteria. So collect your audit criteria. So check how many days you have to prepare your checklist and your audit agenda. It is better to write the audit agenda only after preparing the checklist. That way you will know more precisely who you want to interview and what you want to see, what you want to check, what is the best sequence, what is the best itinerary, and how much time you need in each stage of the audit. So distribute the study of the audit criteria for the available days. Writing a useful checklist is demanding. You want a fresh head, a sharp mind. So don't try to do it at once, okay? And what is this? What is an audit checklist? An audit checklist is a tool used by auditors to remind them what questions they want to ask, what documents and records they want to check, what activities or conditions they want or they need to observe. A checklist may have questions, may have tables to collect information and remind the auditor about the size of the sample to consider. So just because you check only one training action records and there was no evidence of effectiveness evaluation, what can you conclude? The training process has a major nonconformity, or the training process is working with some minor nonconformity. So we will see how to write checklists for evaluating effectiveness, how to write checklists from a flowchart, or from a procedure, or from a standard, or from compliance obligations. So let's go to the first kind of checklist. So how to develop an audit checklist about process effectiveness. So normally organizations don't do this kind of audit because they are used to emulate, to copy what they see certification body auditors doing. However, the more mature a management system is, the more relevant is the effectiveness topic. So auditing process effectiveness. What does this mean? So consider a process to audit. So process 3, develop sample. What is the output of such process? Samples developed. Okay, but is that really all you want to do to launch samples? Think about what could be the desired outcome obtained with the process. So you want samples that sell. You want samples that make the company earn good money. And you want samples developed quickly. So think about the purpose of the process as developing winning samples, well budgeted and within the defined time frame. So winning samples will be something like we develop samples that are approved by customers and therefore give rise to orders. Well budgeted samples, we develop samples where the actual cost of production does not exceed the estimated cost of production. And timely samples, we develop samples within the time frame we promise to potential clients, to potential customers. So now let us continue. So you can start by imagining yourself as auditor interviewing the overall process owner to see how the process is performing. And before starting to delve into the details of the process, you can find out about its effectiveness. So before knowing if they are doing things right, you want to know if they are doing the right things. So you ask, is the process adequate and effective? You are asking the question to the person best suited to know and to decide if acting is needed. Of course, there will be an answer. An answer is not an evidence, and auditors work with evidence. You want to see some evidence. Normally, less experienced auditors take an answer as an evidence. They ask a question, they receive an answer, and they move on without seeing any evidence supporting the answer. So, on what basis is the answer justified? So you are asking for evidence. Then you can ask, what is the performance of the process indicators? Success rate of proposals, rate of poorly costed samples, average time to develop a first sample. So there is a connection between the previous answer and this question. So another question can be, let me see, are indicators calculated with the expected frequency? Don't forget to ask and see the evidence. Are the results analyzed with expected frequency? Don't forget to ask and see the evidence. Okay. What conclusions are decisions made? Which decisions? Do non-conformance situations in process performance lead to corrective actions? Can I see an example? Were causes determined? Were real corrective actions taken? Were they implemented? Were they effective? Ask for evidence. You see, in the meantime, doing this, you are auditing clause 4.4.1. You are auditing clause 9.1.1, 9.1.3, 10.2, even 10.3. Now, you can go even deeper and ask, are process indicators sufficient to assess process performance? For example, what do they mean with samples that make us good money? What is good money? What is the strategic orientation of the company? Volume and cost, or margin and price? So we can have a well-budgeted samples with lousy margins, for example. That will be not good if the strategic orientation is around margin and price. Or we can have lousy, lower margins without volume, for example. That's bad also. Still, you can cross process performance indicators with customers' voice to verify if they are aligned. So consider the downstream processes. What do customers say about sample development? What do customers say about production based on samples? What complaints have you received in the last 12 months? Are there any trend studies? Is there any relationship between the main reasons for complaint and the development of samples? So consider this. You haven't dived into the process yet, And you already have an interesting number of questions and evidence about process performance. After answering these set of questions, the auditor may not know anything about the conformance of the process, but may already know whether the process is effective or not. Can the auditor, even before the audit, have access to the process performance measured by the indicators? So can the auditor have access to an analysis of trends associated with complaints or to the result of the assessment of customers' opinion regarding the development of samples? If so, the auditor can look at the numbers and graphs and advance the type of investigation to be carried out during the audit. So this about the process, a checklist about the process effectiveness. So next kind of checklist, so will be about developing a checklist from a procedure. So in my approach, I read the procedure and I look for verbs and I highlight them. Verbs determine actions required. Then I highlight what is acted upon or what is changed by the action. And I also highlight any imposed constraints. Then I look for an entry point for starting to write the checklist or for starting to develop the itinerary for the audit about this topic. So for example, in this case, I decide to collect information directly while auditing operations. So first, I look for the actual devices. I will pick 3 devices currently in use. Then the information that they carry. So a first check to confirm that currently they are within the calibration period. Later, with this information, while auditing the function responsible for calibration, I can ask to see the calibration results issued by the calibration lab. And I can check if any validation of results took place. And if the results are okay, I can do the calculations or ask someone to explain them to me. Checking the calibration certificate issued by the calibration lab, I can check if it is an accredited calibration lab, and I can confirm that calibration was done before due date. So this is the kind of approach that I use for developing an audit checklist from a procedure based on what kind of actions are required, what kind of constraints. It's from this kind. So I can use these questions and put them in a table, something like this. And this way, I can convert questions into columns in a table, and the number of rows is the sample size. So during the audit, I will be remembered that, okay, don't forget to check 3 devices, and I can put information regarding each device there. Now, another kind of checklist to develop is develop an audit checklist from a flowchart. So I look at the flowchart and assume a cynical and suspicious posture. I assume that what is in the flowchart may not be being followed, not because people are necessarily dishonest or lazy, but because of the risk of failure exists. So therefore, I mark what leaves me with doubts. I mark what can go wrong. I mark what I want to see. Okay, so for any product on production right now, or for any product dispatched last week, so is my entry point. Again, my entry point, I can ask to see how everything started. So I want to see the protospec form filled with information. Then I can ask to see how, I can ask to see the prototype sheet and the technical sheet. Then I want to see an evidence of a decision concerning prototype approval. So who approved? Where is the proof? Are changes recorded in the technical sheet? Can I see the evidence? Same for the prototype sheet. I can ask to see the sample manufacturing order, but perhaps is not relevant. I can ask to check this work instruction. Let me see here. And yes, I want to see evidence of sample validation. What more? So now, based on my marks, I start developing a set of questions and requests to see records. So, for example, can I see customer validation? Can I see what tests you run internally before sending it to the customer? Can I see the work instruction? Are the tests performed in accordance with the work instruction? What results did you get from these tests? Where do you log them? It is not clear in your procedure. So do you confirm that your results are in accordance with the customer requirements on point 1? Where can these be evidenced? So I want to ask this topic, so about the sample manufacturing, so the manufacturing order. I think it is not relevant to me. So about regarding the topics 2 and 5, can I see these records? Do they evidence the approval of the prototype? Do they evidence the requests for changes? Do they show feedback from those involved in the prototype's production? And is there no need to register feedback from sample manufacturing? I don't see nothing in the flowchart about that. So more questions regarding the flowchart. So in addition to the customer's requirements, are there explicit compliance obligations to be respected? And during the prototype definition, are the applicable compliance obligations considered? Are they explicit? Can I see them? Then, can I see evidence that the sample meets applicable compliance obligations? Again, all these questions, I can translate these, or you can translate these into a table to organize information and remind the auditor about the sample size. So this kind of technique used to develop an audit checklist from an audit flowchart. Okay. Now, what comes next? Developing an audit checklist from compliance obligations. So as an example of compliance obligation, I will use a decree law from my country, a decree law number 39/2018, establishes the regime for the prevention and control of pollutant emissions into the air, transposing a European Union directive. And this this decree of law has 23 pages. So we must distill 23 pages into a set of mandatory requirements that can be evidenced. Okay, my background is chemical, so I remember to use these in my labs. When I was a chemical engineer, I used these kind of topics in the laboratory. So we must distill these 23 pages into a handful of requirements. So some of them are like this. So ensuring the capture and confinement of all diffuse emissions to exhaust systems, monitoring continuously or periodically, in this case, periodically, of pollutants subject to emissions. If substance and mixtures that have these risk phrases are used, carry out periodical monitoring twice a year, and then electronic submission of monitoring results within 45 days to the environmental agency. So what can we do with this? So it will be something like this, the kind of question. So about the first topic, visit the facilities. Are there any diffuse emissions not captured and channeled to exhaust systems? So this is not kind of a question to make, but something that we can see with our own eyes, but just by walking in the facilities. Now, about this, I can ask evidence that Monitoring is done according to frequency and complies with emission limit values. And also, so the facilities, the monitoring, and this one here, I can ask evidence that monitoring results are submitted within the 45 days. And if auditees say that they do not use these kind of chemicals with these risk phrases, okay, I can ask to see some chemical safety sheets to confirm risk phrases. I try to do it very diplomatically. I try to not convey the idea that I don't trust them, that I believe that I don't believe them. Okay, so something like this. So basically, developing an audit checklist from about compliance, from legislation or regulation or something like that is basically asking about evidence, what is required. What we have here more, so we have also this about, okay, so how to develop an audit checklist from ISO 9001 directly. Okay, so in my approach, I read the clause and I highlight relevant verbs, okay, because verbs are action. And I highlight also what is change or act by those relevant verbs. And I highlight any mandatory documents or records. Now, I can start listing the questions that I want to ask and the evidences that I want to see. So, for example, this case will be choose one or more functions in the system to use as an example, okay, as a basis for the audit. And for those functions, what is the required competence? So this part is the theoretical part. I ask for, in this case, I ask for a function, theoretical, so for the function. Then what we do is I move to the concrete. So I choose one or more persons performing those functions. And I ask, so are they competent? How do you support that conclusion? Ask for any situation where competence gaps were found. What actions were developed to close those competence gaps? So were they performed? Were those actions effective? Can I see the evidence? Remember, you can use a table to collect information and remind sample size. So while doing an audit, you can start from here, collect evidence and then ask for their procedures, okay? Or you can start by asking the procedure and starting from there, collect evidence and confirm that it is according to the standard, okay? So we will come back to this later, to this topic. What more? One thing about the checklist regarding ISO 9001. So be aware of internet checklists, okay? If you don't, be aware of internet checklists if you don't do some changes, okay? So consider this example. You are auditing top management and you start your internal audit with a question about the quality policy. You ask something like, so this is directly, I took this directly from an internet checklist. So did the top management establish, implement, and maintain the quality policy? Now, imagine an outsider capable of reading minds. And this is what that person, that outsider, starts to read in the mind of the top manager. The top manager, so is being audited. And he hears this kind of question from an internal auditor, and you'll start saying something like, who is this guy? Where has he or she been living for the past few months? Is he the last person in the organization not to know that we have a quality policy? Of course we have. Well, so the awareness sessions were useless. This guy doesn't know. So you can use checklists taken from the internet, but try to adjust and adapt to your reality, to what you already know from your experience and study of the documentation, okay? Now, so we saw here how to develop the checklist for the effectiveness from a flowchart, from compliance obligations, from the procedure, from the standard. So now Okay, so now you have a set of questions to ask and things you want to see and check. Now you have an idea about what the audit will be. You can design what you think is the best itinerary for the audit. You want to design a smooth evolution where you are collecting information and evidence and using them later at another stage or while interviewing another auditee. So you don't want to audit a function more than once, okay? At least you want to design that constraint into the audit. So you don't want to, I remember a series in television where the detectives were always coming back and asking different questions to the same persons. We want to avoid that. Okay, of course, during the audit, you may have to interview a function more than once, not because you designed that into your checklist, but due to any evidence that emerged during the audit. Okay, so look for the list of questions and set an anchor. An anchor is, I see an anchor as where do I start my questions from? Okay, a position from where you can ask a sequence of questions and look for evidence in a meaningful way, communicating a sense of planning. So you are not shooting questions at random, you are following the logic, you are showing that you are a professional. So knowing the itinerary and your anchors, you can now order your questions and add the tables. The ordering may be real or just by numbering the pages. Now, what comes next? Now you know the itinerary, you know what you want to ask, you know what you want to see or check, so you can estimate the time needed for each stage of the audit and with whom you want to interact with. Okay, so now you will have your checklist and the rationale for writing your audit agenda. So send it to the person or persons that need to know it. Okay, so now we will start the audit. Now we'll see how to use the checklist during the audit and how to complement the checklist during the audit. So what we have is something like this. So I like to say, to use this kind of wording. Now it's time to go fishing, okay? So when an audit starts, the situation is like this. In one side, we have the reality of auditees. And on the other side, we have the reality of the auditor. Auditors are not aware of the auditee's reality, okay? They don't know. So there is like a thick brick wall between the two realities, okay? What an auditor can use is his checklist, his census, and interview techniques. So what an auditor do is it starts fishing. So based on the checklist, based on the census, based on interview techniques, the auditor starts collecting evidence and starts making judgments based on what he or she sees or hears. So between reality and the audit criteria, and takes notes on the checklist, okay? And during the auditor catch some fish. For example, while auditing process 3 developed sample, the auditor concluded. So samples are internally approved and validated by customers. There are proofs. However, it seems that on average, customers only validate the second sample. And sometimes it takes 4 samples to get customer validation. There are proofs of that. So perhaps this is not very efficient. Okay, remember the quickly developed sample in the purpose of the process that we saw previously. Also, while auditing the process owner, the auditor concluded number of complaints is higher than target, and 33% of the complaints are related to poor sample design problems. Again, is there any problem with designers' competence? So This is the information that the auditor can carry and use later while interviewing other auditees. So this kind of information was collected by the auditor using the checklist. So now let's see what happens. Before the audit, at the office, the auditor prepares the checklist. Then, during the audit, the auditor uses the checklist. So during the audit, the auditor does not repeat exactly the questions of the checklist, okay? So the questions of the checklist are a reminder for the auditor. During the auditor must consider the person in front of him or her and what was learned in the audit until that moment. So the auditor uses the checklist to record evidence, record findings, record any doubts and questions that emerge. Later, at another stage, during another interview, the auditor uses not only the checklist, but also all what was learned until that moment, okay? Use them as input together with the checklist. So it's a kind of an avalanche effect. So as the audit proceeds, there is a buildup of information to be used together with the checklist. Now, let's see. Now, while auditing process 3 model sample, the auditor found that on average, customers only validate the second sample, and sometimes it takes 4 samples to get customer validation. And also the number of complaints is higher than target, and 1/3 of the complaints are related to poor sample design problems. You see, the auditor learned this. This information cannot be ignored or forgotten. You can't act as if it were not known. So it is a valuable input. It should be used in the interviews that follow, if appropriate, together with a checklist. So let's consider that now, after auditing the process 3 model sample, the auditor goes to audit the human resources, okay? So after auditing the process 3, the auditor is going to audit the human resources. And what inputs can the auditor use? He used a checklist and what was learned previously. So let us now use the checklist developed to audit clause 7.2. Okay, so remember the questions. So this is my first question in the checklist. So choose one or more functions in the system. So previously, so now interviewing the human resources, I say, so previously I audited the process 3 model sample. So if you don't mind, I would like to audit the sample designer function. Okay, so what is the required competence for a sample designer? And oh, you have that on your job descriptions? Great. Can I see the sample designer job description? Okay. So this is the theoretical part. Now I go to the specific part, the concrete. So I audited the sample designer MA. Is she competent on her job? Was there any evaluation of her competence? Oh, you have a competence evaluation form. Great. How do you do this competence assessment? Do you do it regularly? Do you do it at the request of the respective manager? Okay, you do it annually. Okay, so when was the last evaluation? Okay, so about 10 months. Okay, and what was concluded in the last sample designer MA competence assessment? Oh, you concluded that she had some shortcomings. Okay, so what kind of gaps? Okay, okay. This fits right with what I collected so far. Okay, so this is what goes in my mind, not what I am saying to the auditee, but okay, they are doing a good job. So I found this situation. They found this same situation. Great. So, and what have you done to close those gaps? Okay, she had training, great. So, oh, you have training records, great. You have records evidencing that she had the training. Was it enough? Was the training effective? Do you have any evaluation of that? Oh, so the training was done 7 months ago, and you still have no training effectiveness evaluation done. But here, in the description of the training action, it is foreseen that the evaluation of effectiveness takes place 3 months after the end of the training. Any particular reason for this to happen? So while I say this, in my mind, the message to myself is, let me avoid finger pointing. Let me be diplomatic. Let me act as an adult. So like, let me act as Mr. Spock, no feelings. Mr. Spock from those films and television series. No feelings, just facts, just act rationally. So beware of conclusions. So I would say something like, I think we have here a non-conformity. So effectiveness evaluation is important. Perhaps it is just a glitch in your system. Let us check other actions already closed. So you must confirm that it is only this training action that they have no effectiveness evaluation, or if there are more training actions without effectiveness evaluation, the difference between major and minor nonconformity. So, by the way, while filing my checklist, I use symbols to help me preparing the report. So if I see a good practice, I make a mark like this. If I found a nonconformity, I make a mark like this. If I have questions to be answered later with another auditee, I make a mark like this. And if things that may lead to improvement opportunities, I make a mark like this. This way, it will be easier to navigate through the checklist to collect information while writing my report. And even more, if I have a 2-day audit, in one day, I write with one color. And on the other day, I write with another color, again, to facilitate, to make easier to navigate through the checklist to collect information. So this was what I have in mind about this checklist. Okay, so I will now, as I said before, I was recording this, so now I will close the recording.